Carol. Good job. Good. Yourself? Pretty good. Good. Whew. Besides this? Not too much. Keeping busy, you know. Well, I started going for walks again recently. But you guys were going for walks all the time. Yeah. Oh, okay. Is it opened? Yeah, we opened last Monday. Okay. Yeah. But recently, yeah. We got those. Yeah. Very good. Oh, well. And as usual, I'm looking for yeah. Nothing. Yep. Yeah, I think that is. I don't know the guy. I do right. Oh, okay. Long hair. That was awesome. Aaron's working like crazy. Danny's working. And they're all working like crazy. Yeah. He wanted to go to school. Well, for a while. Yeah. So he's very good. Another 2 years, maybe great maybe there's stuff already that I don't know. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. No, what am I talking about? No, what I'm going along with the son of it.
Yeah. nice to see so many people gathered here this afternoon as we gather to remember Gerry Willis, as we gather to share remembrances, to see your stories, and of course to see a lot of the wonderful memorabilia that's out in the foyer. Really pretty amazing to honor his life. So we're going to do a very short afternoon mincha service so that we can say Kaddish together, and then we'll invite people to share remembrances. So we're in our weekday book, which is the blue book, on page 113. And apparently someone has lost a chain and it is hanging from the microphone, so if that's yours, please come and claim it later. I suspect it's actually from Beit Sefer class this morning. Page 113, Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yehalalucha Selah. Happy are those who dwell in your house. And even in times of sadness and sorrow, we recognize that it is in the house of God that we dwell. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yehalalucha Selah. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yehalalucha Selah. Ashrei, Ashrei, Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha. Ashrei, Ashrei, Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha. Happy are those who dwell in your house. They will sing your praises forever. Happy are those who dwell in your house. They will sing your praises forever. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yehalalucha Selah. Happy are we who dwell here in God's house today, and reminded of how happy Gerry was and Nancy over the years that they were here together with us at Solel. I invite you to join with me on page 116 with Chatzi Kaddish. Yitkadav Yitkadash Shemei Rabbah Be'amad Yivrach Yirtei V'yamlich Malchutei V'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayedechol Beit Yisrael B'galav Yitzmahan Kariv V'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'alam Amen Umayah Yitbarach Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitale v'yitalo Shmei D'Kedusha B'richu Le'elam min kol berchata v'shirata Tushbechata v'nechemata Dam yiron me'ama V'imru Amen. We turn to the words of the Amidah on page 30 as we rise in body or in spirit. Page 30. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elokei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor v'Hanorah, El Elyon, Gomer Chasadim Tovim, V'konei HaKol, V'zocher Chasdei Avot V'imahot, U'mevid Geulah Magen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magen Avraham Ezratzara, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayei HaKol Hatzara B'Oshia, Mechalkel Chayim B'Chesed, Mechayei HaKol B'Rachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim B'Rofeh Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umkayem Emunato Lishanei Hafar, Michamocha B'Givurot, Umido Melach, Melech Memitum Chayei, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman Atah Le'achayot HaKol, Baruch Atah Adonai, Mechayei HaKol, Atah Kadosh V'Shimcha Kadosh, U'Kedoshim B'Chayom Nihallelucha Selah, Baruch Atah Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh. Please be seated as we continue with the benedictions for weekdays. We join together responsively in the English and then followed by the Chatima, the final words of the prayer. You favor us with knowledge and teach mortals understanding. May you continue to favor us with knowledge, understanding, and insight. We praise you, Eternal One, gracious giver of knowledge. Baruch Atah Adonai, Chonei Hada'at. Help us, our Creator, to return to your Torah. Draw us near, O Sovereign God, to your service, and bring us back into your presence in perfect repentance. We praise you, Eternal One, who delights in your repentance. Baruch Atah Adonai, Harotzeh B'Teshuvah. Forgive us, our Creator, when we sin. Pardon us, our Sovereign, when we transgress, for you are a gracious and forgiving God. We praise you, the gracious God, whose forgiveness is abundant. Baruch Atah Adonai, Chanun Hamarbeh Lisloach. Look upon our affliction and help us in our need, O mighty Redeemer. Redeem us speedily for your name's sake. We praise you, Eternal One, Redeemer of Israel. Baruch Atah Adonai, Goel Yisrael. Heal us, Eternal One, and we shall be healed. Save us, and we shall be saved, for our hope lies in you. Grant us a complete healing from all our wounds, for you are a faithful and merciful healer. We praise you, Eternal One, healer of the sick. Baruch Atah Adonai, Rofeh HaCholim. Bless this year, Eternal God, and let its produce bring us well-being. Bestow your blessing on the earth and enable the seasons to yield abundant goodness. We praise you, Eternal One, who blesses the seasons. Baruch Atah Adonai, Mevarech Hashanim. Sound the great shofar to proclaim freedom, raise the banner to liberate the oppressed, and let the song of liberty be heard in the four corners of the earth. We praise you, Eternal One, Redeemer of the oppressed. Baruch Atah Adonai, Podeh Ashukim. Pour your Spirit upon the rulers of all lands, guide them that they may govern justly. May you alone reign over us in steadfast love and compassion. We praise you, Eternal Sovereign, who loves righteousness and justice. Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech Ohei Tzedakah U'Mishpat. May those who stray find their way back to you. May all evils soon give way to goodness. May you prevail over the arrogant. We praise you, Eternal One, who conquers evil. Baruch Atah Adonai, Shover Resha U'Machniach Tzadon. Have mercy, our eternal God, upon the righteous and faithful of all peoples, upon those who join themselves to our people, and upon all of us. Uphold all who faithfully put their trust in you, and grant that we may always be numbered among them. We praise you, Eternal One, staff and support of the righteous. Baruch Atah Adonai, Mishan U'Niftach L'Tzadikim. And turn in compassion to Jerusalem, your city. Let there be peace in her gates, quietness in the hearts of her inhabitants. Let your Torah go forth from Zion and your word from Jerusalem. We praise you, Eternal One, who brings peace to Jerusalem. Baruch Atah Adonai, Notein Shalom L'Yerushalayim. Cause the plant of justice to flourish. Let the light of deliverance shine forth according to your promise. For we await your deliverance all the day. We praise you, Eternal One, wellspring of deliverance. Baruch Atah Adonai, Matzmiach Keren Yeshua. Hear our voice, our eternal God. Have compassion upon us, and accept our prayer with favor and mercy. May we never be turned away empty from your presence, for you are a God who hears our prayers and our supplications. We praise you, eternal one, who hearkens to prayer. Baruch atah Adonai, shomea tefillah. Be gracious, eternal God, to your people Israel, and receive our prayers with love. May our worship be acceptable to you. Fill us with the knowledge that you are near to all who seek you in truth. Let our eyes behold your presence in our midst and among our people in Zion. We praise you, eternal one. We praise your Shekhinah to Zion. Baruch atah Adonai, hamachazir Shekhinato l'Tzion. Page 41. We gratefully acknowledge, eternal God, that you are our creator and preserver, the rock of our life and our protecting shield. We give thanks to you for our lives which are in your hands, for our souls which are in your keeping, for your wondrous providence and your continuous goodness which you bestow upon us day by day. Truly your mercies never fail and your love and kindness never cease. Therefore do we put our trust in you. O God, our Redeemer and our Helper, let all who live affirm and praise your name in truth. Eternal God, whose name is goodness, we give you thanks and praise. And we pray for peace. On the bottom of page 42. Shalom Rav, Al Yisrael, Tasim Le'olam. Shalom Rav, Al Yisrael, Tasim Le'olam. Yiratahu Melech Adon, Lechol HaShalom. Let's take a moment or two to pray the words that are in our own hearts. Oh, say shalom, B'Rama. Oh, say shalom Aleinu. They are called Israel. They are called Bnei Adam. Oh, say shalom, B'Rama. Shalom. and shalom. Shalom Aleichem Yisrael. We continue together with prayers for Shiva, prayers at a house of mourning. Page 119. What is the source of my help?
My help will come from the eternal, maker of heaven and earth.
God will not allow your foot to slip, your guardian will not slumber.
Surely the guardian of Israel will neither slumber nor sleep.
The Eternal is your keeper, the shade at your side. The sun shall not harm you by day, nor the moon by night.
The Eternal will shield you from all evil and will uphold your soul. The Eternal will guard your coming and going from this time forth and forever.
Page 120. To be said by those who are mourning Gerry, and I invite anyone who considers yourself among the mourners here in Gerry's family, here in our Solel family, to read together at the top of page 120. Creator of the universe, you give me life with its mingled experiences of joy and sorrow, achievement and shortcoming, strength and weakness. Teach me to accept with courage the loss of my beloved Gerry. May the memories of our life together make me grateful for the time we shared, and may the companionship of family and friends bring me comfort. Help me to honor my loved one by living my own life most fully, and thereby draw closer to you, the fountain of life, in whom every soul finds purpose and hope. Amen. As in the world around us, so too in human life, darkness is followed by light, and sorrow by consolation. Life and death are twins. Grief and hope walk hand in hand. Although we cannot know what lies beyond the body's death, we put our trust in the undying Spirit who calls us into life and abides to all eternity. We rise for the El Malay. El Malay Rachamim, Shochen Bomromim, Hamsem Nechana, Tachat Konfei Hashleina, Malot Krashim Utorim, Kezora Harakia Masirim, Et Nishmat, Akiva Ben Avraham Besara, Shahalach Le'olamo, Anal Barachamim, Hastirehu Beseter Knafech Halalamim, Utzror Litzarachim Et Nishmato, Adonai Honachalatu V'yanuach B'shalom V'mishkabo, V'namar Amen. God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in the shelter of your wings among the holy and pure, to the soul of Gerry Willis, who has entered his eternal home. We pray that you remember with mercy all the worthy and righteous deeds that he performed in the land of the living. May his eternal soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. The eternal God is his portion. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. We join together now in our concluding prayers, the prayers of Aleinu on page 128. We remain standing. Aleinu Shabbat Adon Hakol, Lateit Gdula Yosef Bereshit, Asher Samchel Keinu Yavet Shemo, V'gor Aleinu Lahavit Malchuto. Please be seated. We join responsively on page 130. Eternal God, we face tomorrow with hope made stronger by the vision of your dominion, a world where poverty and war are banished, where injustice and hate are gone. Teach us more and more to respond to the pain of others, to heed your call for justice, to pursue the blessing of peace. Help us, O God, to gain victory over evil, to bring near the day when all the world shall be one. On that day, the word of your prophet Zechariah shall come true. On that day, O God, you shall be one, and your name shall be one. Let holiness move in us. Let us pay attention to its small voice. Let us see the light in others and honor that light. Remember the dead who paid our way here dearly, dearly, and remember the unborn, for whom we build our houses. Praise the light that shines before us, through us, after us. At this time, in remembrance and love of Gerry, we rise in body or in spirit to recite the words of the Kaddish prayer. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, ve'alma divrah kirtei yamich malchutei, v'chayei chon v'yomechon, v'chayei t'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agalah v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah v'varach le'olam u'lamei almaya. Yitvarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei t'kudusha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, dam yiran be'oma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'okol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'romav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'okol Yisrael, ve'okol b'nei Adam, v'imru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all those who mourn, and comfort to all who are bereaved among us, among all the people Israel, and among all the nations and families of earth. Amen. Please be seated. And I'd like to invite Rabbi Englander to come and join me on the bima. Sherry had asked that we close the service with the singing of Lechilach, which is one of the beautiful pieces of music that Gerry enjoyed, and one of the last pieces of music that he listened to in this world.
Well, I have to bring it a little closer.
Okay.
To a place
long as you're here. Gerry's life was indeed a blessing to all of us gathered here today. And now is the time to share memories, funny stories, all of those little small pieces that as a whole made up who Gerry was and who he remains with us today. And I thought, as long as you're here, why don't you start us off?
As long as I'm here. Okay. Thank you, Rabbi. First of all, it's just wonderful to see such a diverse group here. Whether you are Gerry's family, whether you're part of the Solel community, whether you're close friends of Gerry, it doesn't matter anymore. Gerry has made us all one. Not just today, but for years and years to come. Those of us in this room have formed an unbroken bond in Gerry's name. So I want to tell you one story from this very pulpit. Gerry used to love talking about the Torah and explaining its meanings and also the physical ways that the Torah is put together. And he often did that at our interfaith Invite Your Neighbor service, where people from many faiths and cultures would come and join us for a Shabbat service. And he would give us explanation, he would open the floor for questions, and he would field them with tremendous confidence and knowledge, until one questioner asked him something that had him stumped. But that didn't stop Gerry. He said, before I answer your question, I'm going to tell you a story. And it's about a Hasidic rabbi back in Poland who used to do a circuit all during the week of different little towns. And he would give a lecture and he would answer questions as he went along and then move on to the next town. And accompanying him was his faithful wagon driver, his balagala in Yiddish. And the two of them did this circuit year after year after year. One time on their journey, they were going to a town they had never visited before. And the balagala said to the rabbi, you know what? I've listened to your lecture at least 100 times. I've heard all of the questions. I know all of the answers. Would you mind if we changed roles when we went into this city and I could be the rabbi? And the rabbi said, sure, why not? So they exchanged coats, they exchanged hats, and the wagon driver was welcomed as the great renowned rabbi as they went into this town. He delivered the lecture flawlessly. He started answering questions with tremendous ability until one questioner asked him something that had him stumped. It didn't bother him. He just said, you know what? That question is so simple that even my wagon driver can answer it. And so that day, I was privileged to be Gerry's wagon driver.
I want you to know that's the last story that you told.
Oh my.
Yes. So you got me going.
Hi, it's so great to see everyone here. I'll say it again. One of the things that I think that Gerry and I shared was a respect for each other, and our stubborn attitude is another big thing we respected in each other. I don't know why he listened to me, but anyhow, he did, and I was very honored. I was very privileged, very, like I said, honored to spend the last number of days with him. And yes, Lechi Lach was the last. We sang a lot of blessings together, but it was the last song that I actually got a response from him, and I mean, it was in the last days when he was not communicating anymore, but he certainly communicated his appreciation for that song when I played it on my phone. And that meant a lot to me, meant a lot. I'm going to read to you from something his sister and his niece wanted to share because they weren't able to be at his funeral. And let me start from his niece in Nova Scotia, Maryland. She says, my first recollection of Uncle Gerald was of him arriving at our home in Salmon Beach in a shiny Mercedes convertible. No surprise. I was 5 or 6 years old. Never had I seen a Mercedes or a convertible car. Sorry, I have to do this. I was smitten. None of my friends had a relative from Toronto who came to visit in such style. To get a ride in this car would be bragging rights for years to come. A few days later, my chance came, but my bubble was broken as Uncle Gerald, being the generous person he was, invited the neighborhood girls to accompany us on a trip. In the car to the ice cream parlor. I was none too pleased as I now had to share the spotlight. Many years later, when I really got to know Uncle Gerald and Aunt Nancy, I had decided to apply to Seneca College in King City to study after high school. As part of the enrollment, I had to go for an interview at the college. Arrangements were made that Mom and I would travel by train to Toronto and would stay a week with Uncle Gerald and Aunt Nancy. The day of my interview, Uncle Gerald drove me to the college, not in a Mercedes, this time in a Cadillac. I did get accepted to the course and in the fall moved to Aurora. My parents drove me to Ontario to help me get settled into my new apartment and school. We then proceeded to drive on to Sandy Mac to visit with Uncle Gerald and Aunt Nancy at their home away from home in Muskoka. No trip there would be complete without some sailing lessons. I spent quite a few weekends at the cottage over the next 2 years. It was a very special place, and his heart was always in Muskoka. If we were not at the cottage, I would go to their home in Mississauga. I hitched a ride to Etobicoke with a classmate, and Uncle Gerald would pick me up. Nancy would get upset as we usually were late home for Shabbat dinner, as a few stops along the way were made to do some dumpster diving. Many a good item was found, I guess it was in the eye of the beholder. Some of the great finds of Uncle Gerald's were old broken lawnmowers that neighbors had replaced with new. He would collect them and disassemble. The disassembled pieces were stored on shelves in his small garage. Whenever a friend, family, or coworker needed repairs, he would rummage through his collection and usually find the piece needed. Every October was the big move. The garage needed to be cleaned out to make room for Nancy's car for the winter. All the lawnmower bits and pieces had to be boxed up and put in their sunroom for the winter, to be followed in the spring with a move back to the garage. This was no small feat, let me tell you. The collection was quite substantial. Everything had to be precariously situated to fit and not fall over. This usually took a couple of weekends. I had the pleasure over these years to spend some time getting to learn about his Jewish religion. I accompanied him to several Sabbath services, partook in Sabbath dinners, and attended bar mitzvahs. My first visit to the synagogue, I was introduced to many of his special friends. One older lady of the congregation stood out. She told me that I would make a very good Jewish girl. Uncle Gerald was quick to speak up and say that she was joking with me. It became a running joke every time I attended. Many years later, we spent time back in Salmon Beach, walking on the shore of the Bay Chaleur, having picnics and barbecues while he got to know our 3 little girls. Many an hour was spent collecting items of interest that washed ashore, logs to make ramps to the beach, pieces of rope or toys. Can you see a pattern here? In the latter years, he and Nancy made several trips to visit us at our home in Nova Scotia while attending Merchant Marine reunions in Halifax. Now it was our turn to drive him around in our Dodge minivan, not quite as luxurious a taxi as I had experienced in the day. He always was very proud to be able to dress in his uniform and display his medals. It was a great day in his life when, years after World War II, the Merchant Marines were finally recognized for their very dangerous contribution to the war, and they became veterans. Many of his stories of the world came from his experience as a teen traveling around the world on these ships. Uncle Gerald had an ability to see things, or premonitions. One evening he called me and as usual asked how everything was going. I stated all was fine, except that I had spent the better part of the evening trying to find the screws from the kitchen cupboards I had repainted and was going to rehang. Later in the conversation, he said he could see a blue and white cup and the screws would be on or near them. Sure enough, on the shelf was a coffee mug upside down, and there lay my screws. On another occasion, we were missing a car key. We had scoured the house, gone through pockets, purses, and even through the car in search of the key. A few weeks later, I mentioned it to Uncle Gerald, and his response was, "I see a shoe." Sure enough, under the key rack was our shoe storage, and one of the shoes was the key. Uncle Gerald was always misplacing items. Yep. He would state that he set a tool or item in a certain spot and go back later and could not find it. Right up until the end, trust me. He was sure the house was haunted and that the ghost was playing tricks on him. Not sure why he could not have the same sightings to find his own items. Uncle Gerald was a very kind and generous person. He always was grateful for all that we did for him and always made a big deal to thank us. I would like to take this opportunity to thank him for all that he did for me and my family over the years. You and Aunt Nancy were and are a fiber interweaved into the making of me. You will always have a special place in my heart. Love, Marilyn. I'm going to give somebody else a chance to talk before I read his sisters.
If anybody would prefer speaking from their seat, anyone wants to speak?
Well, that's good, then I don't worry about a mask or anything. I was thinking about something that a lot of people sometimes have an experience with, say, a conversation that goes like this: oh, you should always make a list of everything you have. And I often have said, oh, I don't have very much. This is in terms of, say, insurance. And so, because of our dear friend Gerry, I said to myself, I said to Pat a couple of days ago, I don't think I know him at all. And then I remembered that I helped Albert, Amar, and a whole bunch of other guys. He was moving his office, and he said, oh, sure, why don't we help move Gerry to this new place he is going to? And that's when I remembered, I do know him after all. And I do have a poem which I hope will be acceptable. And it goes like this. Days passed, and the memory and the realization that you were gone was ever clear to me. A dust resettling with the footprint resettling as well. And I thought I had lost you until I looked inside my heart and I find you there still. Thank you.
I've never heard this done so quiet.
Many years ago, when I was the editor of the Shamus in the early days, one of the best times was when Gerry submitted many prose, but they were humorous prose. He had a wicked sense of humor if you got to know him well. And it was just one of those real joyous times.
Anyone in the family?
Hello, my name is Esther Turner, and I met Gerry when I joined Solel officially. I've been unofficial for many years, but officially when I joined. He welcomed me in the door, gave me a siddur, showed me to my seat. And the other welcomer, Dave Litwin, came sidling over and sat next to me and said, "We're going to give you an aliyah." And I said, "How do you even know I read Hebrew?" And Gerry comes back and says, "I think we know you read Hebrew, right?" And that was my introduction to the two lovely people. And Gerry and I remained in contact. And then over the years, I had a very flexible work schedule. And I went and picked up kosher corned beef, herring, lox, bagels from the Jewish area. And we'd had many, many brunches and lunches together where I met his very good friend Sam Foyer. He would join us sometimes for breakfast or lunch. And we enjoyed many, many laughs and many reminiscing. And always I remember the welcoming and embracing of who I was. But the one thing I would like to remember with Gerry is the way I used to get myself and Nancy into trouble. Nancy loved chocolate, and so do I. I had strict instructions to not buy any chocolate. I never listened. I would bring giant Cadbury chocolate bars, which my husband Alan bought for me, because he'd go to the UK store and buy that special chocolate. And I'd smuggle them into Nancy over, whether it was in his old home or his new apartment. And so for some reason, Nancy couldn't resist it. She had to smuggle out 2 pieces before breakfast was over or the meal was over, and bang, I was in trouble again. And that's what I remember very, very fondly, and many other things too. And I just love the way that they loved myself and my family unconditionally. There were no strings attached. As a matter of fact, I gained their trust and integrity, and I always felt I was blessed by this young couple, who, always young in their hearts, that welcomed Al and I and my whole family into their circle of friendship.
David, if you'd like to speak from the pulpit, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm Dave Cummins, Gerry Lewis's Gerry's son-in-law. I spoke with Emily, Gerry's sister, yesterday. She lives near the ocean in New Brunswick. She wanted me to say to you all here today how pleased she was with the service on Tuesday, and to express her sincere appreciation to all of the people involved with that service. During the past few weeks, the ice had broken up into large chunks on the bay near where she lives. On Monday morning, when she looked out her window, the ice was gone, as it had been pulled away by the tide. Then she received a phone call about Gerry, and learned that he too had passed away with the tide. How appropriate for a man who was a sailor. I should add that Westminster Presbyterian Church, where Linda, my wife, is the minister, will also miss Gerry's annual appearance in his merchant Navy jacket and cap when, with other military service members, he would place a memorial wreath during our service and remembrance. Any discussion about Gerry involves stories. Gerry loved stories, and he was a great storyteller. The best stories are usually true. Sometimes they are humorous, and sometimes they have an uplifting message. So today I'm going to tell you 4 short stories which I told Gerry, and he really enjoyed. I do this with the hope that in the next few days, should you reflect on Gerry's passing with grief, you might recall one of these stories, and it might put a smile on your face. I believe that's what Gerry would want. First story involves Sam Levinson, rest his peace, a stand-up comic from the States, who began his career as a school teacher. he told all of the people that the stories that he told on stage, for which he became famous, were simply anecdotes of what had happened in the classroom when he taught. Only the people involved with the schools realized his comic routine was basically a documentary of his teaching career. One of his stories was about a young fellow we'll call McGirt. Sam was teaching phys ed to 13 to 14-year-old boys in a school, and when they had the phys ed period, the boys from two of the classes would come together with Sam as their teacher, and the girls from the same two classes would go together with a female teacher for their part. It was springtime. Sam decided to get the track and field going. And so he took all the boys out of the school, they crossed the field, he had the rakes and shovels and all the paraphernalia of track and field. He had his clipboard, and then he realized he'd forgotten something. He left his stopwatch on the desk in his office. So he really would have trouble doing track events without the stopwatch. But he didn't want to leave all the boys there in the field, so he figured he'd go ahead. And after a while it bothered him, so he called over one of the lads, McGirt, and said, "McGirt, I've left my stopwatch on my desk in the office, so would you mind going and getting it and bringing it back so they can use it?" And McGirt was a fellow who was not considered to be the brightest light on the street. He was a very pleasant fellow, but he wasn't considered to be too bright. McGirt said, "Yes, sir, I'll get the stopwatch." And McGirt ran across the field. As soon as McGirt was out of sight, Sam realized, oh, what have I done? The girls will be in the change room changing for pool, and that's the only way into the dressing room because the outside door is on a fire lock. You can't get in that way. So he, well, we'll go ahead. In time, McGirt returned. He said, "Here you go, sir. Here's your watch." Sam was quite surprised at this. And he said, "McGirt, did you have any trouble getting the watch?" Well, there was a little bit of a difficulty. The door we came out was locked. I couldn't get back in. So I went around the front of the school, came in the front, went down the first floor stairs, into the basement, and I got to the dressing room. I opened the door a bit, and there were a lot of naked girls in there. I didn't know what to do, but I knew you needed the watch. So I swung the door wide open, and I shouted out, "Close your eyes, girls, I'm coming through." Went, got the watch. There you go, just what you wanted. After that, Sam thought that maybe McGirt had a lot more intellectual ability and ingenuity than he thought. The second story, and most people here are probably too young to remember steam engines before we had the diesel engines. The steam engine part of our heritage, and you'd have the steam engine with a boiler, and behind it the coal car, and the coal would go into the boiler, heat it up, and that would be the power to drive the train. In the book Pathfinder, Gerry mentioned that during the Depression, picking up coal that he'd fallen from the train, Gerry and his brother would do that and take it back to their home to burn in their home furnace. I explained to Gerry about the tradition, if you would, of the history of the east end of Toronto. Those of you who are familiar, Union Station, down not too far from the lake. And if you're going toward Montreal or the Maritimes, there's quite a grade the train must take to get up close to Danforth at Main Street Station. Well, what would happen during the Depression, which was a terrible time, people had trouble finding money to put food on the plates, clothes on the back, and heating their home was an important but a lower priority. But during the Depression, the steam engineers, when they filled up at Union Station, would direct the colliers to pile the coal as high as they could on the coal car before their journey down east. And they would follow the directions. At the same time they were doing this, a group of people, apparently usually teenagers, would be carrying buckets full of human waste, doggy waste, any kind of excrement that they could find, up to the train tracks. And they'd spread this crap along the rails. And then they go into the bushes to see what would happen. So the train would leave Union Station and hit the grade. And as it went up the grade, with this greasy stuff on the tracks, the wheels would sometimes stop and then go, stop and go, causing the train to shudder. as the train shuddered, a large amount of the coal piled high in the coal car fell off to the side of the train. The train went its way. The teenagers came back out of the bush and picked up the good coal that they could take home to use to help their family heat their homes. The engineer knew what he was doing, but more interesting perhaps, when the railway company found out about this practice, they very discreetly told the engineers, keep doing it. But, they directed the police not to patrol that part of the track. And no one was to be arrested for trespassing or stealing if they were picking up coal for their families. In difficult times, we all have an opportunity and a responsibility to help others. The next two stories are also brief. Lloyd Dennis, a former principal in Toronto, he now passed away and retired. He was also a member of the first parachute division that Canada ever had, and also a co-author of the Hall-Dennis Report in the 1970s. I had the pleasure of working with him on the staff development program for my staff. Wonderful man, and a great raconteur, just like Gerry. He would often talk about things in the war, certain things he wouldn't talk about, which is common to veterans, but he'd talk about his adventures in the war. At the end of his discussion, he'd say, any questions? And invariably, somebody would say, you're in the parachute corps? How many times did you jump from the plane? And he'd reply by being quite incredulous. He'd say, jump from the plane? Are you crazy? You jump from a plane, when it's flying, you get killed. I never jumped from a plane. I was in the parachute corps, and yes, we landed at Normandy and all the rest of it, but I never jumped from the plane. However, I was pushed 89 times. Lloyd Dennis, when he was going to university, raised money in the summer by working in lumber camps up north. And good, healthy work, hard work, but it gave him the money that he needed. And at one of the lumber camps, a big one, they had a large staff, and the chief cook was an older lady. She supervised all the cooking, and she was really in charge of the bacon. And her apple pies were famous throughout the county, just incredible. Men always looked forward to them. So at the end of the day, he was coming back with the crew to the camp, and as they approached the camp, they could smell this beautiful apple pie smell. Oh, great, we're gonna have apple pie for dessert tonight. This is really good. Well, Lloyd was always curious by nature. So he said, well, let's take a look in the window. Maybe we can see what his secret is. So they went to the kitchen, lifted up, looked in the window, and sure enough, the ovens were all going, and there were 3 tables full of apple pie, and the lady had just finished putting the crust on top of the layer of apples for the pie. And they watched. And then the lady hesitated for a minute. She put her hand in her mouth and pulled out her dentures, pulled her teeth out. And then she proceeded to go around to all the pies and crimp the edges so they would be just right before they went in the oven. I hope you continue to enjoy apple pie. God bless Gerry.
I want to read you what Emily, his sister in Salmon Beach, shared. Gerald, the eldest of 3 children, was born on a farm in Salmon Beach, New Brunswick, but farm life was not for him. He loved the water and would comb the beach for any treasures the tide brought in and lug them home. If Nancy was still living, she would say nothing had changed in his lifetime. He and his younger brother Everett fastened beach logs together to make rafts and spent many summer days poling their crafts around the bay without ever learning to swim. Divine intervention kept them both safe through many adventures and misadventures. Gerald was born with the gift of gab, which our dad always said got Gerald in and out of many sticky situations. Always a rebel, Gerald disliked school, and especially math. He was in grade 8 and struggling with the concept of substituting letters for numbers. In frustration, he threw the algebra book on the floor and walked out of the school, never to return. Although his schooling ended there, his education was really just beginning. Gerald made his way to the port city of St. John, New Brunswick, where he signed on with the St. John Digby Ferry, but even that was not adventuresome enough for him. He soon found the recruiting office for the Merchant Navy and signed up for a convoy through the war-infested Atlantic to India, where he spent his 16th birthday. The Crowther family, who had immigrated from Rangoon via Ceylon, lived next door to us. Their youngest son, Tom, and Gerald became close friends, a friendship which lasted throughout his lifetime. Gerald was enthralled with the stories the family told of the Far East. When he found himself in India, it was like a dream come true for him. Each of his trips lasted about 9 months, during which time we heard little or nothing from him. Then he would arrive home unannounced with a stuffed sea bag over his shoulder. How excited we were to see the treasures that bag held. Tapestries, brasses, sandalwood bowls, even an elephant carved from teak, and a stuffed mongoose. Gerald always had a thoughtful and generous side, and his treasures were not only for his immediate family, but for friends and neighbors. He once brought a bunch of heather for a Scottish family whose son was the hired hand next door. A neighbor called to offer condolences this week and recalled her father buying a new car and planning a visit to see their daughter in Scarborough. Gerald was home at the time and offered to drive them up. Although about 10 at the time, she recalls the trip with Gerald driving all the way, taking them to well-known restaurants and delivering them to her sister's door. Gerald was a talented mimic, and having met many nationalities during his sailing days, he was able to speak with many different accents. He was also a prankster and was delighted to pull many telephone pranks with or without the help of his bosom pal, Tom. The one person he could never fool was our Uncle George. When Aunt Lou came away from the phone with some outrageous news she had just heard, Uncle George would say, "Gerald must be home again." We had party lines at that time with 10 or more households on each line. Following one voyage, Gerald arrived at the railroad station and tried to phone home for a ride, but after many tries, the line was still busy. He asked the operator if she could clear the line. "Only in an emergency," she replied. He asked her what would qualify as an emergency and was given the usual list, including fire. Gerald immediately quipped, "Well, I'm burning up right now." As anxious as Gerald was to leave Salmon Beach in his youth, the yearning to return grew as he aged. He always loved his visits home. Meeting old friends, trips around the peninsula, picnics, meals out with cousins, and bonfires on the beach. Our cousin Connie recalls taking him on a trip, including a picnic to Hay Island one summer. She later received a coffee table book listing all the place names and their origins for New Brunswick. It has a special place in her home and heart. Gerald loved dining at fine restaurants where he could order, guess what? Fish and chips. The last time I saw Gerald, we took him out for dinner. There was always a conflict between his kosher food and my gluten-free meals. The last time we shared a meal, Sherry suggested a hole in the wall, I believe called Bobby's Hideaway, where the fish was a special treat, halibut. Several times during the past year, I asked him if he was able to get out there for a meal, but the answer was always negative. Phone conversations with him always included questions about the condition of the beach, if there were any good sitting logs, and whether the ice was in or out. Sherry had kept me apprised of his condition when he was no longer able to speak for himself, and I knew the end was near. I awoke on Monday morning, opened the drapes, and saw that the ice had moved out. I asked myself if Gerald had shipped out with the ice. I was not shocked when less than an hour later, I got Sherry's call that his earthly life, with its toil and suffering, was over. As Sherry so aptly put it, Gerald did not dance to a different drum, but was the drum. The drum rolls on my heart as I'm left behind with my memories. Memories of the times he was there for me. When my parents, my husband and son died, I was not able to be there for him, but I'm forever grateful for those who were there, especially Sherry. I am also grateful for his best gift of all, the sister I never had, my beloved Nancy, Emily. I don't know if there's anyone else who wants to speak, but I've been going through his papers, a few of his, and by some miracle I came across this piece of paper from June 5th, 2008. I do not know how these things appear, but it's interesting because it's from the Canadian Merchant Navy Veterans Association, Hamilton Burlington branch, established in 1995. Interestingly enough, they refer to the veterans that they've lost. Like I said, this is 2008, and they talk about it as being crossing over the bar. And there's actually a poem that I'd like to finish my talk with by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Crossing the bar. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me. And may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea. But such a tide, as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew from the boundless deep turns again home. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark, and may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. For though from our bourne of time and place, the flood may bear me far, to hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar.
Well, we want to thank everyone for all of the beautiful memories that you're sharing this afternoon. And we invite you to stick around and have some refreshments, take a look at some of the memorabilia that have been brought in to share Gerry's life, and most of all, tell some more stories. Thanks for coming this afternoon.